Oh my God.
From all indications, there were multiple shooters who fired dozens of shots, perhaps more than 50. Remarkably, all of those bullets missed a baby who was sitting in the car that was targeted.
Investigators remained at the scene well after nightfall at this corner littered with shell casings, where somehow a baby in this bullet-riddled car emerged unscathed.
What's the purpose of shooting at a car when you know there's a child in the car? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it could be a lot of other people who's lost their life here today.
Kirk Bell is the godfather of 26-year-old Gabryel Ayers, who relatives identify as the woman who was shot and killed in her white Chevy sedan around 1:30 p.m. at 79th and May Street, her car then crashing into a van.
This here is unbelievable. This young lady was a beautiful young lady with a beautiful child, and life just cut short. For what?
Ayers' boyfriend in the car also shot multiple times, but her 13-month-old baby daughter, who was sitting in the back, escaped unhurt.
It's a miracle that baby was not shot. It's a miracle.
St. Sabina Church is around the block from where the gunfire erupted, and the church's food pantry is on that corner. People inside hiding in a back room, and after the gunfire, emerged to help the victims.
So they saw, the young man and the woman shot up in the car as they were trying to get the baby out. But they gave the baby immediately to the police, and the policewoman took it in her car and was holding it.
They need to clean this city up. They need to. This gangs and the shooting and the killing is just unbelievable.
Gabryel Ayers' mother tells me her daughter worked as a hairstylist and was training to be a letter carrier. Police have not offered a motive for the shooting.
In the days after the shooting, there was something investigators kept returning to. Not the shell casings, not the crash, not even the number of bullets that tore through metal and glass on a quiet Chicago street. It was something quieter than that. A detail that didn't scream, a detail that didn't bleed. It was the silence of a man who survived, the calm in his posture, the way he described the attack without describing fear, and the question that followed him out of the hospital and into the interrogation room. If this was random, why did it feel so directed? Before we go any further, welcome to Cold Case Chronicles. We look for the truth in the shadows of cold cases and closed files. If you value this kind of deep dive investigation, please consider subscribing. And as we begin this journey together, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Whether you're joining us from the United States, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world, leave a comment below. It helps us remember that these stories, though local, touch hearts across the globe. The name that would come to define the case was Gabryel Ayers, 26 years old, a mother, a daughter, a woman who had built her life in the ordinary ways that rarely make headlines, through routine, work, family dinners, shared responsibilities. On the evening of February 5, 2026, she was sitting in the passenger seat of a vehicle on the south side of Chicago. Her 1-year-old child was strapped into a car seat behind her. The engine was running. It was not an isolated alley, not an abandoned road. It was the 7900 block of South May Street, a residential stretch where houses stood shoulder to shoulder and porch lights blinked on at dusk. Then gunfire. Not a single shot, not an argument escalating into chaos, but a burst, coordinated, multiple shooters, according to police. Windows shattered. The vehicle lurched forward and struck a building. When officers arrived, they found Gabryel unresponsive. She would later be pronounced dead. Her boyfriend, seated in the driver's seat, had been shot but survived. The baby in the back seat was physically unharmed. In the immediate aftermath, it appeared simple in the way that public narratives often do. A drive-by shooting, another act of violence in a city too familiar with headlines like this. Police from the Chicago Police Department canvassed the area, collected shell casings, searched for surveillance footage. The public statement was brief. 2 adults shot, 1 deceased, 1 hospitalized, child safe, investigation ongoing. But investigations rarely remain simple, especially when the patterns begin to resist coincidence. The first layer was ballistic. The majority of the bullets struck the driver's side of the vehicle. The windshield bore spiderweb fractures that radiated inward toward the steering wheel. The driver's door was perforated in clusters. The passenger side, where Gabryel sat, had damage, but less concentrated. Enough to be fatal, not enough to suggest randomness. Investigators do not declare intent based on trajectory alone, but they note patterns, they note repetition, they note whether fire appears scattered or focused. The second layer was surveillance. Cameras from nearby homes and businesses captured fragments, headlights approaching from behind, a vehicle slowing, muzzle flashes illuminating the winter air. The shooters did not exit their car. They did not chase. They did not circle back. They approached, fired, and left. The duration was seconds. The precision, however, suggested anticipation. The car carrying Gabryel and her boyfriend had been stationary. It had not been speeding away. It had not been engaged in visible confrontation. Which raised the quiet question, were they waiting? In the hospital, the boyfriend spoke with detectives. His tone, according to later summaries, was steady. He described sudden gunfire. He described confusion. He insisted he had no known enemies, no recent threats, no conflicts that would justify this scale of attack. He framed it as random violence, wrong place, wrong time. It is a phrase that offers comfort because it implies inevitability. But investigators are trained to distrust inevitability. Randomness is statistically possible. Targeted violence, however, leaves different fingerprints. Publicly, the story settled into tragedy. Friends of Gabryel described her as attentive, devoted to her child, working toward stability. Her social media reflected ordinary life, photos of her baby, captions about gratitude, small celebrations. There were no public warnings of danger, no posts hinting at fear. Perfection, however, is not always the absence of conflict. Sometimes it is the management of it. Those who knew the couple described them as together, but not flamboyant. There were no visible explosions, no viral arguments, just routine. And routine can conceal imbalance. Detectives began examining phone records, text messages, location data, patterns in the days leading up to February 5th. They looked for anything that suggested surveillance, threats, disputes. They also examined something subtler, emotional distance. Had there been arguments, financial stress, outside relationships? No accusation was made, but investigators often begin by asking not who pulled the trigger, but who might have expected it. The neighborhood offered no immediate witnesses willing to describe the shooters in detail. The vehicle used in the attack appeared to be dark-colored, possibly stolen, license plate unreadable. No immediate arrests, and in the vacuum of certainty, speculation began. Community members whispered about gang retaliation. Others suggested mistaken identity. But the question investigators returned to was narrower. If this was retaliation, for whom? Gabryel had no known criminal record, no public disputes, no documented threats. The boyfriend's history, however, was examined more closely. Prior associations, prior conflicts, social networks that extended beyond the domestic sphere. Detectives are careful not to equate association with guilt, but motive often flows through connection, and the pattern of bullet impact, heavier on the driver's side, kept resurfacing in internal briefings. This is the point in many cases where the narrative could turn accusatory, but restraint is essential. There is a difference between suspicion and evidence. The police did not publicly name the boyfriend as a suspect. They did not announce that he was the intended target. They described him as a victim who survived. Yet privately, investigators continued to test the possibility that Gabryel's death was collateral, a word that feels clinical but carries irreversible weight. If he had been the target, what would that mean? It would mean the shooters approached with specific intent. It would mean Gabryel's presence did not alter their plan. It would mean the baby in the back seat was not enough to deter them. Intent, in such scenarios, becomes not explosive, but calculated. Not rage, but focus. The deeper investigators looked, the more they examined behavior before the shooting. Had the couple's location been shared publicly? Had anyone known they would be parked there at that time? Was the stop spontaneous or expected? Phone data indicated calls earlier in the evening. Routine movement, nothing overtly alarming. Yet sometimes planning does not leave digital footprints. Sometimes it leaves timing. The public conversation shifted when local outlets reported that detectives were reviewing additional CCTV footage from blocks away. Footage that suggested the suspect vehicle may have trailed the couple's car for a short distance before the shooting. This was not officially confirmed in detail, but the implication lingered. Trailing suggests following. Following suggests awareness. Awareness suggests target. The boyfriend, recovering from his injuries, maintained his account. He expressed grief. He attended memorial gatherings. He did not flee. He did not refuse cooperation. In many cases, avoidance signals guilt. Here, there was none visible. Instead, there was composure, and composure can mean innocence. It can also mean compartmentalization. Investigators know that demeanor alone proves nothing. Gabryel's family spoke publicly about her life, not her death. They described her laugh, her protective nature as a mother, the way she balanced responsibility and hope. They did not speculate about motive. They asked for justice. They asked for information. In doing so, they reframed the case away from rumor and back toward humanity. It is easy for a victim to become a headline, harder to remain a person. The Chicago Police Department continued to process ballistic evidence, linking shell casings through national databases to determine whether the firearms used had appeared in other crimes. Early reports suggested high-capacity weapons. The number of rounds fired indicated overkill, if the goal had been random intimidation. Overkill, however, aligns more often with certainty that the target must not escape. The baby's survival became a symbol in media coverage. A 1-year-old, shielded by angle and probability, untouched in the back seat while glass and metal absorbed impact. It was described as miraculous, but miracles do not answer motive. They only deepen tragedy. If the boyfriend was the intended target, investigators would need to identify who believed they had reason to kill him. Financial disputes, personal vendettas, territorial conflicts. Each possibility required evidence. Phone extractions were analyzed, financial records reviewed, interviews conducted with acquaintances. No immediate confession emerged. No text message stating intent. No recorded threat that could be presented as motive. This is where the psychological excavation begins, not of the shooters, who remained unidentified at this stage, but of proximity. Did Gabryel know of any danger? Had she expressed fear? Friends described her as grounded, focused on her child. They did not report paranoia. There were no documented police reports filed by her regarding threats. The absence of reported fear does not prove safety. It only proves silence. Silence in many cases is misinterpreted as peace, but silence can also mean normalization. If the boyfriend had ongoing conflicts unrelated to Gabryel, would he have disclosed them fully? Would he have considered them serious enough to endanger her? Or would he have believed distance from past disputes insulated his present life? Investigators considered whether this was a crime rooted in older grievances that do not expire simply because someone chooses domestic stability. The pattern of bullet impact remains central. Experts reconstructed trajectories. The majority of rounds entered through the driver's side, traveling laterally. Some penetrated through to the passenger side. Gabryel's fatal injuries were consistent with crossfire from that direction. This does not conclusively establish target, but it suggests prioritization. And prioritization suggests choice. Choice is the dividing line between chaos and control. If the shooters chose the driver's side as focal point, they were not firing blindly, they were aiming. And aim implies objective. The boyfriend's statements were compared against video timestamps. Did his account of timing align with captured footage? Reports indicate no major contradictions were publicly disclosed, but investigations often withhold discrepancies while building cases. Calm behavior after trauma is not uncommon. Shock can present as steadiness. Yet investigators are trained to note whether grief manifests or is postponed. In cases where one partner dies and the other survives, suspicion often falls inward before outward. But here, law enforcement emphasized external shooters. There was no indication of staged scene, no sign of self-inflicted damage. The volume of gunfire and external trajectory patterns supported an outside attack. The question remained whether that attack was personal or opportunistic. Over time, analysts mapped connections between known offenders in the area and the type of weapon used. Gang-related retaliations often involve multiple shooters and high-volume fire, but they also often involve public disputes or prior incidents traceable through police logs. None were publicly linked to Gabryel. If the boyfriend had past conflicts, they were not overt enough to surface immediately. This absence created a void in narrative, and voids invite speculation. Online forums debated whether Gabryel had been mistaken for someone else. Others argued that the boyfriend must have known more than he admitted. Law enforcement remained measured. Investigation ongoing. No arrests announced. Reward offered for information. The deeper truth in cases like this is uncomfortable. Violence can be targeted without being public. A grievance can exist without social media record. A plan can be formed in private conversation. And when bullets fly, they do not distinguish between intended and unintended victims. If Gabryel was not the intended target, her death represents the collateral cost of someone else's conflict. If she was the intended target, motive becomes more complex and more intimate. At this stage, official confirmation of target had not been declared, but internal theories often precede public statements. Detectives continued reviewing additional surveillance footage from adjacent intersections. They tracked the suspect vehicle's potential route before and after the shooting. Patterns of movement were analyzed for familiarity with the area. A targeted shooter often knows escape routes. Random shooters flee blindly. If the suspect vehicle demonstrated controlled entry and exit, that would support premeditation. And premeditation reframes tragedy as decision. The case remains a study in controlled violence, not an argument that escalated beyond control, not an impulsive confrontation, but a drive, a pause, an alignment of vehicles, and a burst of gunfire concentrated toward one side. In that concentration lies the question that refuses to settle. Who was meant to die? As of the most recent updates, no official public declaration has confirmed that the boyfriend was the intended target. Investigators have not named suspects. The narrative remains open. But the pattern persists in analysis. Trajectory, timing, surveillance, and behavior all examined for signs of direction rather than randomness. And at the center of it all is Gabryel Ayers, a woman whose life was not defined by violence until violence defined her headline. She was not an argument, not a statistic. She was a presence in a car seat turned towards someone she trusted, in a moment that did not announce itself as final. The tragedy of targeted violence is not only in who is chosen, but in who is present. And sometimes the most devastating crimes are not explosions of rage, but exits chosen quietly, carried out efficiently, leaving silence where explanation should be. The investigation continues, the questions remain, and the silence, steady, controlled, unresolved, lingers. If you believe in remembering victims beyond headlines, subscribe to Cold Case Chronicles. Share this story respectfully, and let the name Gabryel Ayers be spoken not as a rumor, but as a life interrupted too soon.